Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Pan Celtica. I told you I would try to give you a second episode this week, and here I am at the end of the week. I apologize in advance if you hear any drinking sounds or me clearing my throat excessively like that. I have been sick this week, and that's why this episode is so late. Although I think it kind of paired out well because I believe Pan Celtica, its previous episode was what, Sunday, I think? And this is Friday as of me recording this. So, beginning and an end to the week, which means you're not far from the next episode of Pan Celtica. This episode, I wanted to talk about, again, just priming, you know, scratching the surface of all these topics about divination, and maybe we'll talk about a little bit of animism. Today, when we think of Celtic divination, we probably think of Ogham, or some people insist that it is pronounced Ogham. You've probably heard of it if you've read in depth about alternative divinations, but I am going to assume that you've probably never partaken of it. Ogham is not visually appealing, I think, in our modern world because it is just tally marks. And tally marks aren't necessarily fun to look at, right? It's a beautiful system that was created, as it is now, in the late 1800s. And I personally really like it. I think most of you know that if you've stuck with me for a little while. I offer Ogham readings over on alabamamagic.com. I like it. However, much like the Celtic astrology charts that you see, or the Celtic months, which all have, tree names that correspond with the Ogham, those are all modern inventions. And, we touched on this last week. Well, actually earlier this week, right? Talking about, what makes a deity, what doesn't make a deity. Is it just belief? Does that, lessen or greaten your opinion on things when you find out that they are newer or older, especially in a religious space or a spiritual space? Those are things that can't be answered by a group. They have to be answered by the individual. When we realize that in history, Ogham was used as like trail markers to write very short notes. It wasn't used in depth as a writing system, at least for the evidence that we have at this time. And it was not at all used for divination or spiritual purposes from the evidence that we have archaeologically, at this time. However, you may have seen, if you've looked into the Celts yourself, they did use runes towards the later part of their history. When they stopped, towards the end, when they were about to become something other than what we called Celts, right? And this is, post the Roman invasion, and now the Anglo-Saxon invasion, right? The Anglo-Saxons were what we would call now heathens, aka pagans that worship the Vanir and Asir, right? Like Norse, we would say, now. So they brought runes with them. The Celts easily assimilated, from what we can see, these runes into their culture. They accepted it. They're like, oh yeah, runes, these work. However, While runes are primarily seen today also as a divination tool, in the past it was used as an alphabet, but again, we're not getting like long-winded stories uh, or essays, opinion pieces, uh, recorded in this style. We're getting, names and titles written over shields and over lodges, over uh, dining halls. It's being used to label things, basically, like a label maker. Very, very, very far in between do we have some instances of runes being assembled into words for magical purposes. But it does exist. Even farther in between that, do we have runes being used as single letters as a divination tool? That's very, very far in between. But we do get singular use of runes as symbols of enchantment. We get them, inscribed on doors to keep, evil out and good things in. We get them inscribed on tools that may have been used in some form of medicinal or healing ritual to enhance said qualities. But certainly not being used in the way that we use them now. And I bring all this up because I see in our community now a desire to label everything that we are currently doing as perfect reconstructions of what our ancestors did. And that's just simply not true. It's not true. And that's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. There's nothing wrong with growing and evolving and doing things different from the people who came before you. In fact, it's encouraged, and in fact, that's how we got to the point we are today as human beings in this civilization. We always are building on what came before us. That's just how it is. Now, I also understand the idea, of, I want to honor those who came before me by doing what they did as they did it. I understand that as well. That's going to boil down to personal preference, but also is going to fall on you to do the research. I say time and time again, don't just take anyone's word for anything, including my own. Go read, listen, and watch materials for yourself to discern what facts we do have at this time about the history of a certain group of people or an era. Personal gnosis goes a long way. I feel like I say that every episode, but it does. It goes a really long way and can get you really far. And for some people, they don't need the validation of history to practice what they practice. They don't need the validation of an outside group or the group that they are in. And that's wonderful. But I think, if you had 10 humans in a room that are practicing, quote unquote, the same spiritual path, I would say 9 out of those 10 are going to at least outwardly try and practice their spirituality the same way together. That goes into, how we are social creatures, the idea of, pact familiarity, pack familiarity, pack solidarity, like this pack protection. I understand that, a pack identity. But, anywho, spiraling back to runes and Ogum. I said we would touch a little bit on animism too. And when I think of animism in the modern pagan space or magical space, to me, it seems very heavily influenced by Disney's, I think, 1995 film, Pocahontas, right? We could say a lot about that. And whether we think that's funny as an influence or if it's, legitimate, quote unquote, or a positive influence, a negative influence, we could get into all of that because of the story of Pocahontas and colonization and all that. But it does seem to be an influence on our community in terms of how we view animism because I see and I hear people in our community describing their animistic views and specifically experiences communing with inanimate objects in the way that Pocahontas communicates with the grandmother tree, right? Like as if it suddenly well, not anthro in this case, I guess, but as suddenly as if it morphs into this humanoid being to speak with her in her language. Certainly, animism can be defined that way. And I'm not here to talk about native spirituality in North America. Uh, but as far as we know, that's not how the Celts viewed their animism, if they were even animistic at all. There is no hard evidence to say that the Celts were animists, but there are lots and lots and lots of suggestions from outward sources. Of course, almost all of these being the Romans recording, their visits with the Gauls. They said that they were humanistic because they seemed to revere trees, different kinds of trees, They were very specific about, naming the different species of trees and how each one had a different spiritual power, right? That could be medicinal. I mean, that could be a lot of things, but the Romans were like, okay, well, this is animism because they believe that these plants all have a spirit, an energy that achieves certain effects and possesses certain qualities. That's what I'm trying to say. But there's no evidence to say that, when Caesar said that, oh, the Druids all get in their cloaks and their robes and they go out at night into a grove of trees that are like in a circle, and they chant and light fires and things like that. We don't know if they were, talking to the tree and the tree was talking back, a la Pocahontas, the film. We don't know that. It's possible, but we don't know that. I think it was more, if they were animists, it was more in line of, a circle of life kind of thing. Of course, we can also tie that into a Disney film if we wish for our millennial and Gen Z audience. I believe it is more in the line of, the energy that is powering me right now to move and to think and to speak is the same, primordial force that is flowing through this planet Earth that allows the Earth to grow plants, to give birth to other animals besides myself, to have seasons, to move us through the universe, to spin around, on our axis. It's the same energy that makes the sun glow. This energy is in all of us, even a book sitting on the shelf, because the book was crafted by man, yes, but comes from materials that came from this universe, from this earth, and thus possesses the same energy, this overarching energy, which we could call a spirit, a great spirit, a holy spirit, right? Animism. It can just be that. You know, speaking of the Anglo-Saxons and the Norse, we have evidence, right, that they named their swords. They named a lot of things, not just swords, but they did give names to their weapons. So when we give a name to something, in our minds, that gives it an identity, right? It gives it an identity. It gives it a, air quotes, a face. It gives it a persona. Suddenly we have an emotional connection to it. If I have a hammer and I'm hammering nails, and I get done with the hammer and I just throw it in a bag really harshly, who cares, right? It's just a hammer. No, who cares? It's just a hammer. If I have a hammer and I've named this hammer George, and I clean George off first before I use him, I use him to hammer in my nails everywhere, do the things that I'm doing with George, and then I toss George over my shoulder and he slams into a pile of rocks. Oh no, don't do that to George, poor George, right? We need to pick George up and take care of him, and thank you, George. Hey, George, thanks for helping me today, and putting him back in the bag, right? That's just things that a human would do once we give it a name. Animism doesn't always assume that there is a level of intelligence in inanimate objects. It can just mean that there is this force of energy, this fifth element, if we want to go with Aristotle here, that is flowing through it. We are all connected by this energy and by this earth, by this force of nature. That can just be animism. It doesn't have to be complicated. It is time for us to be winding down. As always, we rambled, but that's what we do here. I gave you 2 topics that don't really correlate. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it piqued your interest on some things, made you think about some things. And, maybe one day we will get a Pan Celtica episode that is pre-scripted from start to finish. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And follows one single topic in depth with historical references, dates, times. Maybe we'll get there. Maybe we'll get there. We probably will get there. But until then, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, to like this video, and also visit me at alabamamagic.com. And if you're feeling really spicy, send me, well, not spicy, that takes on a different connotation these days, but if you're feeling friendly, send me an email at elijahavalon@minister.com. I'd always love to hear from you. And until next time, be safe, be well, and be informed. And you know what? Be inspired. And goodbye.